From Los Alamos National Laboratory, this is the National Security Science Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the National Security Science Podcast, a spin-off of National Security Science magazine at Los Alamos National Laboratory in beautiful northern New Mexico, which is where we are recording today. With me is National Security Science editor Whitney Spivey. Whitney, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Brenda. Thanks so much for having me on.
You're here today to talk about one of our former lab directors, Charlie McMillan. You just heard him playing the recorder in the intro, and you will hear more music that he loved at the end of this podcast. Charlie died tragically in a car accident this past September, and you recently wrote an article for National Security Science about his life and career. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So Charlie was the director when I started at Los Alamos in 2015. I never knew him personally, but like so many others, I was immediately struck by and impressed by both his demeanor and his leadership style. And we can talk more about those things in a minute, but I remember attending my first all-hands meeting at the lab where he spoke, and I remember thinking, yes, I want to work for this guy.
Yeah, me too.
When we got the news of his passing last September, it was such a shock on so many levels. Brenda, you and I share an office, and we had a pretty steady stream of people coming by and truly grieving and sharing their stories. And it became very apparent to me how much Charlie meant to folks, not just here at the lab, but also in our local community and across the entire nuclear security enterprise community. So when it came time to plan our spring physics issue of the magazine, it just made sense to include a profile on Charlie's life and career. I was the one who wrote it, and I'll be honest with you, I was really intimidated at first. The more I learned about Charlie, the more I read, the more people I talked to, the more I realized two things. First, just how remarkable Charlie was, and second, that there was absolutely no way I could capture this man in a 3,000-word magazine article. There's just no way to do him justice or to go into the level of detail he deserves. But that's what I attempted to do, and that's what you can now read online. If you search for Los Alamos and Remembering Charlie McMillan, which is the title of the article, you should be able to find it. There's also a related article that has remembrances from 28 past and present Los Alamos employees.
Yeah, try to read those and not tear up a bit. It's very sad.
I know. But also, so many of those remembrances made me smile and even laugh. There's just a lot of very happy memories, and I think that really speaks to how beloved Charlie was.
So tell us more about that. Who was Charlie? Start at the beginning.
Well, I don't know a lot of details about Charlie's childhood, but the overwhelming sense I got from the people I talked to was that Charlie, from a very young age, really threw himself into learning everything about anything that he was interested in. When I sat down with Charlie's wife, Janet, who is just the most lovely woman, she told me that Charlie's motto was always, do your best in whatever things you do. And if you're going to bother doing something, don't bother doing it halfway. She said that outlook was what really drove him to success in everything he did. 3 areas that Charlie really had a lot of passion for were music, math, and physics. He ended up studying all 3 subjects in college, but only majored in 2 of them, math and physics. At graduate school at MIT, Charlie took a job at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And here we have a soundbite from him that talks about how he ended up there.
As I was coming to the end of my grad student career, I started interviewing, and I interviewed at Shell. I interviewed at the Institute for Defense Analysis, IDA. And a recruiter from Livermore came to MIT, and I talked to the recruiter in part because one of the guys who had the same thesis advisor that I did had gone to Livermore, and one of my office mates had gone to Livermore. So I don't know whether they said, hey, you ought to go talk to Charlie, or what the deal was, but I talked to the guy from Livermore. I had interviews at all 3 of those places. And I got an offer from the Institute for Defense Analysis. And Didn't hear anything from Livermore, didn't hear anything from Livermore, didn't hear anything from Livermore. They were nominally in a hiring freeze in the early 80s. And so I was about ready to accept the offer from IDA when all of a sudden an offer from Livermore showed up. And I thought about it and said, IDA basically does policy analysis, technical analysis kind of things. And I think it could have been quite interesting, but I really wanted to do science. I'd spent my life up to that point doing science, learning to do science. And Livermore very clearly offered the opportunity to do physics. And I said to myself, well, I can always go do analysis later in my career if I want to, but it would be really hard to go the other direction, to go from, doing things like policy analysis to doing real science.
Charlie ended up spending 22 years at Livermore, first as an experimentalist, and then he began to rise up through management. In the early 90s, he took over the Weapons Code Development Group in Livermore's B Division. And I just want to note here that this was a really pivotal time for the country's nuclear weapons laboratories, Livermore and Los Alamos, which had for decades conducted full-scale detonation tests on nuclear devices. But in September 1992, a nuclear testing moratorium went into effect, and also the United States decided not to introduce any new weapons into the stockpile. So, ensuring that existing aging weapons would work now required a different type of scientific understanding. And that's where these weapons codes came in. To completely oversimplify it, nuclear testing went digital, and scientists had to ensure the health and performance of the stockpile using various types of data that were then modeled and simulated on supercomputers.
Here we have a clip from Kim Boudil, who is currently the director at Livermore. She used to work for Charlie, and she remembers that time here.
Charlie was always interested in whatever was new and next and emerging in technology space. So he started there as an experimentalist, and he was one of the early pioneers in subcrit experiments, bringing new diagnostic techniques to the fore for those experiments. Then he moved into the code realm, where he really pushed our code teams to be ambitious in the goals that they set. We were writing all new high-performance simulation codes, and he really brought a physicist mindset to that work. How can we really advance the state of the art? How can we really advance our knowledge and capabilities? How can we build better models? How can we build more modern tools for our design community to use? He was a real scientist. He brought a scientist mindset to everything that he did. He was a great student. He learned a great deal about whatever it was he was taking on so that he could be very credible in that role. And I think people trusted that, that he was not just managing a project or trying to promote a new way of doing things. I don't know how familiar you are with the design community. It's a very conservative, very slow to change group of people. So it takes a special kind of person to really bring that community along to adopting a really new approach in some cases to the things that we did. So I think he was identified as someone who was always willing to take on whatever the new emerging challenge was in the division, whether it was something he'd done before or not.
In addition to getting to know people like Kim, Charlie also got to know people like Mike Anastasio at Livermore, right?
Right. Mike Anastasio, who ended up being the lab director at Livermore and then at Los Alamos, he was always a few years senior to Charlie. And from what I understand, he really mentored Charlie and encouraged Charlie to apply for jobs that were maybe outside of his comfort zone. And of course, one of those jobs was at Los Alamos. Here's a clip of that.
And then there was, of course, the fateful brown bag lunch in the park at Livermore. Now, this is my memory. Not everybody has the same memory I do, but I invited him out to lunch, and we met in the park and sat at this picnic table in Livermore, where I probed the interest he might have in being a part of a team to go to Los Alamos. And, of course, we met in the park because, as many of you know, talking about contract competition, you can't use government resources. So we couldn't use the phone or we couldn't use the offices, so we met in the park. And subsequently, I believe, phone call to him to offer him the rare opportunity to join the bid team. And of course, all our trips into San Francisco to write a proposal. And, to the surprise of many, we actually won the government's contract competition, which a major change in both of our lives. And Charlie, of course, continued his already remarkable career, and as we've heard, advancing to become the 10th director here at Los Alamos.
So Charlie came to Los Alamos as the head of weapons physics. He eventually oversaw all weapons work at Los Alamos. And then in 2011, he became the lab director here. And one of his first challenges was something I don't think anyone really anticipated. Here's a clip.
3 weeks after I became director, we had a wildland fire back up in the Jemez that within a few hours was threatening the lab property. And we had to evacuate the town. We had 3 of the nation's Type 1 fire teams there fighting the fire. Every day at noon, I had to stand up in front of a bank of national TV cameras and start by saying, "I'm Charlie McMillan, I'm the director of Los Alamos," and then talk about the fire. But I'll tell you, after you say that for a week in front of TV cameras, you're the director of Los Alamos.
That was a really tough time. I remember evacuating. Here's Mike Anastasio also commenting on the fire.
There was the Las Conchas fire. And I thought that was an opportunity for the whole world to see the great leadership and integrity that shined through with Charlie about how he handled that. Reassuring the community and all the outside entities who were so concerned that all the right things were being done.
Eventually, the fire was contained and we all came back to Los Alamos, and Charlie could focus more on the technical aspects of being lab director. It turns out this focus was very informed by his work at Livermore. Here's another clip from Charlie.
What I brought from Livermore was a deep value of the independence and the independent roles and views between the 2 laboratories looking at national security problems. The way one of my colleagues once put it to me, but I think it's a good way to think about it, is he said, if you go to your doctor and your doctor says, "Boy, you got a serious disease and you're going to die tomorrow," you might say, "Well, I'd like a second opinion." And he says, "Oh, I've got a colleague down the hall. Why don't you just go see him?" And the answer is, no, I don't want the same opinion twice. I really want a second opinion. And that's what Livermore and Los Alamos do for the country. They're not the same opinion twice. They bring different technical traditions to the table. They bring different tools to the table in terms of the codes that they use, in terms of their approaches to experimental work. And when they do peer review of each other, you don't always get the same answer. And I saw that in spades when I moved from one lab to the other. And I felt it was something that was very important to preserve for the nation. And it was very tempting to say, well, why don't we just bring that capability to Los Alamos? And I consciously resisted that temptation because I didn't think it would be a good thing for the country. I thought those differences, that diversity of intellectual approach was important.
As lab director, Charlie played a critical role in advancing the laboratory's experimental capabilities. He was instrumental in the acquisition and activations of Roadrunner and Trinity supercomputers, 2 of the fastest supercomputers in the world at the time, which played a major role in assessing the health of our nuclear weapons. He was also a major proponent of cutting-edge research in areas like advanced manufacturing, vaccine development, Earth systems modeling, and Mars research.
Yes, absolutely. Charlie recognized that weapons is our foundation here at Los Alamos, but he also knew that we could and should excel in other technical fields as well. His leadership led to key investments and advancements that have strengthened the lab's legacy of innovation and world-class science.
Here's a clip of Jill Ruby, who until recently led the National Nuclear Security Administration. She was also the director of Sandia National Laboratories around the same time that Charlie was director of Los Alamos.
Being a lab director is a hard job. It is a job where there are a lot of stakeholders, and nobody would do the job of a laboratory director if they didn't believe deeply in the mission. And I know Charlie did. I certainly did. And so, again, one of the things I remember Charlie saying to me is, as lab director, everything you do is sort of in the public eye, is sort of scrutinized, especially in Los Alamos, which is a small town, and even in Albuquerque, which is a bigger town, but still Sandia is a major employer here. And he said to me once, he said, I feel like I have a thought in the morning in my closet, and by the time I get to work, people are talking to me about it. And it does feel like that. It feels like you are being, your thoughts are being sought, your ideas are being scrutinized at all times. But Charlie, he knew that was part of the job, and he handled it, remarkably well. I think Charlie was fundamentally a problem solver. He didn't, I don't think he enjoyed adversity, but he recognized it was part of the job. So Charlie would try to find solutions to satisfy the constraints on the problem, if he could. And if he couldn't, he would try his hardest to explain why we don't see that path that you might be suggesting, or somebody else might be thinking there's a different path will work. And he would try to explain it. He fundamentally believed everybody was, could understand if you explained it to him. And he would take his time to do that. And that's how we got through hard, adversity and hard times.
Charlie's ability to communicate was really remarkable. Here's a clip from Fred D'Souza, who was Charlie's communications guy for several years.
He was a gifted communicator in that not only did he understand the various techniques of communication, and more on that in just a minute, he understood that it's not only about being right from a factual or logical standpoint. He understood that things like credibility and trust and reassurance are really difficult to measure empirically. Without those things, it doesn't matter if you're right. If you disregard the emotional side of certain interactions, your message will be lost. One of the things Charlie connected on was the rule of the three things. For most speeches or written pieces, 3 topics is the magic number. Less than that, and you're not specific enough. More than that, and you're too far in the weeds, and people are going to lose you. So he literally would say to his audiences, from members of Congress to regulators to high school students, he would say, I'm going to talk about 3 things. And then he'd list them and proceed in that order.
I do remember the 3 things for many of Charlie's all hands. They were very effective, and I don't recall his talks ever being long or boring.
Me neither. And I think it kind of comes back to Charlie always doing his best at whatever he was doing. He really had to learn how to be a good public speaker. He hired a coach, and he really practiced.
Some things, though, came naturally to Charlie.
Definitely, like kindness and empathy. Here's Charlie's executive assistant, Liana Lovato.
More than anything else, Charlie was remembered for his kindness. He always said please and thank you, good morning and goodbye. He took his time to know each of us, really know us and our families. He celebrated with us during weddings, births, graduations, and he supported us through hard times with the same quiet strength. Charlie and Janet welcomed us into their home, hosting dinners and holiday parties and student gatherings. They shared their lives with us, and we felt like part of the family.
I heard similar sentiments from so many people as I was writing the article. Here's Livermore director Kim Budil again.
I always appreciated Charlie as a person and as a leader. When he gave me that first big job, he said, I'm going to give you a lot of responsibility, but I'm going to give you the authority to go along with it. And he really lived up to that. He empowered people. He was very earnest and very genuine, and made a big impression on me early in my career.
I think it's safe to say Charlie made a big impression on many people, even in retirement.
Yes, definitely in retirement. Charlie retired as lab director at the end of 2017, but as Janet notes, he didn't really retire.
I used to tease him that he was failing retirement because he joined 2 boards of startup companies, and he continued to work with the management program at the Los Alamos lab. It was an exciting thing for him to be able to contribute in that way without having to be on the 7th floor. He was most recently failing retirement working on an AI project, thanks to a call from Tom Mason, the current lab director, when we were on vacation in Belize.
Here's Tom Mason's side of the story.
So I was tasked with calling Charlie on his cell phone, not realizing he was on vacation snorkeling in Belize. And I think it was a weekend. I called him on a Saturday maybe, and he explained that he was snorkeling in Belize, and I thought, well, this is not going to go well. Here I am going to try and convince him that he ought to take on this challenge, and he is enjoying the life of a retiree, looking at beautiful tropical fish on reconstructed coral reefs. But he didn't hang up on me. He said, let me think about it. Let me talk to Janet, and I'll get back to you next week. And he made some calls. He talked to Jill Ruby, the NNSA administrator, and wanted to understand whether or not he could impact, and he agreed to do it. And he was supposed to only be working part-time on this, but I would say part-time of Charlie is worth more than time and a half of most people. He really jumped into it and made a huge, huge difference. That contribution also is going to be with us for a long time because this is a really important area, and Charlie came in at a really critical time as we were trying to figure out how are we going to tackle this problem, and made some really significant contributions.
That clip was from Director Mason's remarks at Charlie's memorial service. He also mentioned in those same remarks how much mentoring Charlie did in retirement and how important that transfer of knowledge was.
The lab's been growing. We've been hiring a lot of new people. And as part of that growth, we're also having a lot of people move into new management roles, and we decided we needed to reconstitute something that existed before in terms of leadership training. And as part of that program, we wanted a set of mentors who could work with groups on the projects that they were doing and give them advice. And Charlie was one of the people we reached out to. He was delighted to serve as a mentor. And I know that the teams that he worked with, in fact, the whole cadre, really valued his input and the thoughtfulness. And so he's made a big contribution to cultivating the next set of leaders for the lab. And that's something that will pay dividends for a long time to come.
I was able to interview several of the folks in the lab's executive leadership development program, and they all agreed that Charlie was one of the most effective mentors they ever had. But it's important to note that it went both ways, that so many people were inspired by Charlie, and also that Charlie drew a lot of inspiration from other people.
And to that point, let's close with a clip of Charlie reflecting on his decades working in the nuclear security enterprise.
As I look back at my career, I just count it an incredible privilege that I was allowed to spend my career in such amazing places, working with people that I couldn't have imagined when I was in grad school. And I think my experience parallels that of many, many people in their lab careers, and that I've been able to do stuff in my career that I could never have imagined when I was a student. It was just beyond imagination. And to get to the other end of a career and feel that way, to me, it's just a privilege. If I'd gotten to the end of my career and said, well, I'm glad that's done, that's not the way I feel at all. It's rather the sense of, how could I be so lucky to work in places like this with people like this?
Thank you so much for listening to the National Security Science Podcast. The music you're hearing now is Rosslyn Castle, one of Charlie's favorite tunes that was played during his memorial service. Don't forget to check out the National Security Science magazine online to learn more about Charlie's incredible life and career, and about how better science equals better national security.